So everybody that's listening, if you're listening to us on one of the 25 radio stations, we greatly appreciate that. If you're listening to us on on the YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, the list goes on and on as far as the podcasting platforms. We greatly appreciate that. Again, like, subscribe, share on those podcasting platforms. Like, subscribe, share. We have a very special guest, Joel Dubin. It is joeldubin.com, dysfunctionalcompany.com is that another great website I would say to go on first. Again, dysfunctionalcompany.com. His Twitter handle is Dubin's Languages. Again, Dubin's Languages. We're going to be talking about the book today. It is The 7 Habits of Highly Dysfunctional Companies. Joel is, if you're watching this, you'll see him holding the book on the screen and with his head banged up against the wall because we all have dealt with crazy, silly, stupid companies throughout our lives, and it's going to continue to happen. Joel, I will shut up, and I want you to talk now, and I want to thank you for coming on the program.
Yeah, Rob, thanks for having me. I really much appreciate it. So I'm a retired cybersecurity consultant. So I worked many years, many decades in the trenches doing consulting work with companies on their cybersecurity, credit card security, and their security policies, and so on, and working with pen testers and all of that. And over the years, just dealing with a lot of company nonsense, I call myself a survivor of the corporate world. So not only were the companies that I looked at often messed up, office politics, there were bureaucracies and stuff like that. I also worked for a lot of companies like that. So I kind of had it from both ends, and I admit that a lot of my job was as a IT security type auditor. So I inflicted pain as well on companies. So over the years, I just developed these 7 habits that I saw were common problems that these companies had. It was almost like the first habit was if it makes sense, don't do it. It seems like the obvious, simplest thing to get anything done in a company. Don't do it. We can't do that. That makes sense. That's too easy. We have to make it complicated. We have to call a meeting, or we have to call a meeting to decide if we need another meeting, and so those were kinds of things, and just you see it every day, and a lot of people these days are miserable in their work, and there's economic uncertainty and there's a lot of layoffs, and I don't deal with all of these problems in a humorous fashion. I often call the book an anti-manual of how not to run a company. So well, we can go further on some of these habits, Rob, or tell me how you want to proceed.
Yeah, I want to go into the habits in just a second, but when I talk to companies, and we went through this the other day, we were supposed to do an interview, and we won't name the company, but I had to call them up because I was struggling. But it's not just that specific company; it's many different companies where you call up, you can't talk to somebody that speaks English, you can't get a person, period. Never mind somebody that doesn't speak English. It's just a vicious cycle that really
You're
makes you
lucky if
go
you get a
mad.
human being. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You can't even get a human in general.
Yeah.
So, why do you feel like this is? Is this just like cost cutting that they're doing this as far as the companies that because I would think if and I know some of these companies are huge companies.
Right.
Obviously, we could just name some big companies off the top of our head, Walmart,
Right.
CVS, Walgreens, the list goes on as far as that goes. We're not going to do a whole list of this. But you call these places up, and again, you can't get good customer service. And you would think that these companies would want to produce some sort of good customer service because any logical person would say, hey, listen, if you produce good customer service, that customer will continue to come back.
Rob, you said logical. That is not how these companies operate at all. So cost cutting is just one of the evils, but it's actually more a result, a symptom than the cause. It's automation, I think. So, I have a whole chapter in here where I say human contact with customers is absolutely prohibited. And customer service people that actually talk to customers, they will be disciplined and that actually customer service is like a conveyor belt. If you get someone, they'll say, no, not my department, and they'll push you on
Yeah.
to another person. And when you say if they speak English, it's just if they speak, if they're breathing,
Right.
you never know. So I go into quite a bit of detail about some funny situations. I mean, I had one where a credit card company who will remain nameless, when my father died and I had to move all of his credit cards over to me and my mother, most of the credit card companies, it was a quick phone call, no problem, it was done. One credit card company who will remain nameless had me on the phone for an hour. And my mother, who was starting to get dementia at the time, she's squawking on the phone. What are they saying? I said, Mom, just say yes. Don't worry about it. Then I get a letter in the mail, an hour. You'd think they would know who I was. Then I get a letter in the mail. We're sorry to hear about the death of Joel Dubin. So I call him up and I say, this is Joel Dubin. I'm still alive. I think you're trying to kill me. And then they're just reading from a script, some stupid
Yeah.
script. So it's mostly automation, and that results also from the cost cutting. And these companies have just gotten so big and so humongous and so bureaucratic, they've just lost touch with reality, with themselves, with their employees, with their community.
I always press zero, Joel, and I just
Yeah,
keep pressing zero and zero until God willing, hopefully when I get somebody.
yeah,
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it is
yeah.
bad. And we're also seeing these big companies treat their employees poorly.
Oh,
And
chapter six.
well,
Yeah,
yeah, we won't name the companies, but I'm thinking of some in my head. And there's some of these big companies that you can buy everything in the kitchen sink at their stores, and they're making cheap money. Sometimes you go in there and the people don't even know how to speak English. They don't know where anything is in the store. And part of it is, you're there, you should know how to do your job. But also part of it is, and that I think this is the biggest part, Joel, and I'd love to hear
yeah,
what you have to say on this, is that it's not just the person's fault that they don't know where anything is and they're in cloud nine by themselves. It's that the person that trained them, the higher up of that store, is not
yeah,
doing the right job and they're not training.
yeah. So I talk a lot about training in the book and about how training is like a mismatch with the employees. There's all this automated training that all of a sudden, if you've worked for a big company, you'll get an email in the middle of the day. You have to take this training in money laundering. Well, that's because there's some regulation. I never touched money. Why should I have to take this? I'm not involved in handling money at all, or some sort of obscure labor law. So yeah, so training is definitely because someone on high, these one hand doesn't know what the other's doing. To me, the successful dysfunctional company that I talk about in chapter 2, where I say turf battles are part of our culture, is you have silos. You can't have these silos talk to each other. That's absolutely prohibited. To have, God forbid, someone needs information from another silo. No, you've got to go through channels. You've got to go through paperwork. You've got to have a meeting. I kind of make fun of all of this. Treating the employees poorly, just to kind of go on that. That kind of straddles both habit 6, where I say, drive out your best employees, ignore the rest, and habit 7, where the company doesn't serve the common good. They all these our people are important. They're our most important resource. And then the next day there's a mass layoff. And I'm convinced, from witnessing many of these mass layoffs and I was in one, actually, not too many. I've been lucky. I just think that I think there's people that sit in a room and throw darts on a board to determine who gets killed.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all these rituals. I mean, I was at a company where I call it ritualistic slaughter, when there was an executive who came in from the head office, the headquarters, on a Monday morning. You knew someone was going to die. So you look under your feet to make sure there isn't blood on the floor yet. And I'm at this company and they fire this real powerful vice president, and they call us in a room and they say, do we have any questions? And I say, yeah, do we still report to Patty, which was his executive assistant? Because she was like the all powerful person that, was in front of this vice president. I mean, there was no rhyme or reason sometimes. I found that a lot of employees are like little islands of expertise that are kind of floating around in this sea of management incompetence. I'd go in as a consultant and I'd work with the team, and the team would be very competent. And they say, "Well, we got a new boss now," and okay, great. And then I come in again. "Well, we got another new boss. We were moved around." These reorgs that make no sense. You wonder, guys with eye patches and bunkers figuring out how to move people around on the chessboard. Who knows? You got
Well,
to check every morning whether you're still on the org chart.
let me ask you this, Joel. And
Yeah.
again, for people listening, we do want to tell you who we're speaking with. If you're just tuning in again, Joel Dubin. It is joeldubin.com, dysfunctionalcompany.com. Again, dysfunctionalcompany.com. The Twitter handle is Dubin's Languages, Dubins Languages. Joel, let's get into this because obviously, with the pandemic that happened, companies had all sorts of movements. There was layoffs, there was remote work. A lot of things changed. Some have came back to reality. Some are still living in the pandemic world. Can you talk about how the pandemic really
Absolutely.
made a lot more of
Yeah.
these companies dysfunctional than they even
Yeah.
were?
I'll tell you exactly how. So I actually was close to finishing this book around 2019, which is
Mhm.
just a few months before the lockdowns and the pandemic all
Yeah.
started. And then I said, "Oh, wait a minute. I have nothing in this book about remote work, remote employees."
Mm.
And as you've seen from reading the book, Rob, that about half the book now is about remote work. I kind of want to talk about both. I talk a lot about offices and people in offices. A lot of his common office culture type things, but remote people are still attached to that. So, answer your question about the pandemic. So, the result of the pandemic was that all of a sudden everybody could work remote, right? Or everybody that could work remote that was in an office type job where they could work remote, and that actually worked quite well for a while. And my job had involved traveling to clients, for example. And I found that now I could do a lot of the work and a lot of the security reviews I could do on Zoom calls, right? And even some of the security testing we did. And I think our clients got spoiled. And I don't mean this in a negative way about my clients, but gosh, we pay all this money for airfare, for hotel, for meals to bring. We're going to save a ton of money. And they just kind of kept doing it. I think the area where it got dysfunctional, Rob, is that where companies kind of lay down a black and white rule, that once the COVID restrictions were lifted or they were officially lifted, by the governments and then the companies and so on. And some of these business owners said, "You must come into the office, right? No more remote." There was like, I don't, it's not a black and white thing. I even say in the book, in a rare portion that's serious, that, it depends on two things about whether you work well remote. Some people, it's just the nature of their personality. They work better remote. They don't have distractions. Some people, they work better in the office. They like to, coffee clutch with their neighbors, bounce ideas off each other, although the dysfunctional company employees shouldn't really be exchanging good ideas. But, so, I personally, I don't have distractions. I didn't, my wife was at home, but we don't have kids or pets or anything like that. And I got a lot more done. I found in the office personally, people were coming by my cube, they would chat, stuff like that. So I think the big effect is the remote. And then now we're kind of in this whole gray area of the hybrid, versus should we be all remote or all all in the office. And again, it depends on the personality. And the other thing, it depends on the nature of the work. Certain types of jobs do require a face-to-face presence. So my answer is it's not black and white. Now companies are struggling. I'm seeing all this stuff in the news about hybrid work and how it fosters a dysfunctional culture. I think the dysfunctional company culture predated whether it was hybrid or not. But
Yeah.
that's one of the effects of the pandemic, Rob, is now we've got this kind of mixed kind of work world, and we can work with it. I mean, there's ways that you can work around it.
I mean, just to interject, this doesn't really, it has to do with what you just spoke about, but it's also not, really relevant in the conversation in one aspect. But, a lot of these companies, they were in big skyscraper buildings, and they owned them, or they had heavy rent
Yeah.
payments on
Yeah.
them.
I
So,
saw that.
during the pandemic, they're telling people to stay home.
Right.
That rent isn't stopping. That rent
Yeah.
is, we have a commercial real estate crisis now. I mean, this is a
Yeah.
whole different wavelength. I'm not trying
Yeah.
to go down that line
Yeah.
right now
And
with you,
yeah.
but that's a lot of the reason too why they say, hey, you got to get back into the office because we already paid for this,
Yeah.
and we
Understood.
need,
Understood.
yeah,
Yeah. And I can't really address that real estate crisis. I know what you're talking about. I've been seeing a lot of it, and companies are struggling now because they've lost space. I talk about in the book in a humorous way where companies that lay off a lot, they create these kind of dark holes in the offices that I call ATDs, which are areas of total darkness, where employees can be banished into them. But seriously, Robert, that's kind of beyond the scope of of the book, and it's not something I can fully address. And I think that
sure.
companies will have to in some way address. I'm not sure, I'm not in the trenches in the real estate industry to say, are we about on the edge of a crisis like we have been? We went through a
Oh,
commercial real estate crisis 20 years ago where there was overbuilding. Who knows?
yeah,
Maybe some of these things will be repurposed, who knows?
right.
That's not an area that I think that's my expertise, but
No,
I
I
hear
was
what you're
just
saying.
saying that because that's just what you just spoke about. We are seeing that in New York City, other specific cities. I'm sure it's happening in Chicago too.
Absolutely.
But regardless, we will move forward with that. And I just wanted to interject with that because I'm, talking to a lot of financial guys. That's what they're really talking about is this commercial real estate crisis. But just moving on, I do want to speak about this because there's a lot of issues with this bureaucracy. We know about the government bureaucracy. President Trump has spoken about the bureaucracy, about the deep state, and how that's a big bureaucracy and controlling the government behind the scenes. Not to get into that, we do have company bureaucracies though, where there's hundreds to thousands of people working in a company. A lot of these people are kind of useless because they're just not really doing anything very valuable for the
Yeah.
company. They're just there.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not really hired to do productive work. I talk about productive work in the first chapter. And in the introduction, I say, what is productive work? It's producing a good or a service. It's after service, after sales service support. And then the third thing is actually improving the product. A lot of people at Dysfunctional Company, they're doing none of the above. So, if they go off on some company gig for a week, doesn't matter if they've lost a week because they're not really doing anything all year anyway. So yeah, I mean, these companies, they've gotten so big that they can't really see one hand can't see what the other is doing. But make no mistake, Rob, I also mentioned in the introduction of the book, this functionality, size doesn't matter. There are a lot of small companies where the issue is not just bureaucracy, it's personalities and ego and stuff like that and so on. But to your point about bureaucracy, when you're mentioning about government, remember, a lot of people in government, they came from private industry. Where did
Right.
they learn all this bullshit? You know what I'm saying? Where did they learn to screw things up? Where did they learn to ignore people? The twin enemies of the dysfunctional company are its employees and its customers, right? So the enemies of government are the people and other people in government. They're not public servants, they're self-servants. They should all wear t-shirts you know that say AMDTAP. I use that stands for Asshole Management Development Training Program, which I go into in depth in the sixth habit about companies not serving the common good. And I talk about how these companies churn out assholes, and then from there they can go into government where they can do real damage.
So let me ask you this. So
Yeah.
what does a customer want do if they're very, disappointed with the way the company is run? Whether it's not having enough cash registers open, whether it's, and this all goes to customer service. You call them up, you can't get a hold of a person. The list goes on and on. You go in the store, they don't have enough people working there to help you. What should the customer do? Because a lot of these companies are monopolies,
Yeah.
and it's
So,
very hard to not shop at a company, and I will
right,
name this company, somewhere like Walmart. I
right,
mean, Walmart is a mega store, a
right.
Target.
Yeah.
I would say Sears, but they're not really in business anymore. But
And
that's
why
going back
aren't
in the
they in
day.
business?
Yeah, that's going back in the day.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying as far as
I know what you're
big name
saying.
companies.
I say just kind of open your mouth and complain and try to reach as high as you can. Now, I've noticed lately, when I say reach as high as you can, try to find out research on the company website, for example, the CEO or something like that, and try to contact them. Now, of course, you're not going to get to the CEO. These guys, they live in ivory towers or in steel bunkers underground, but they do have staffs. And sometimes if you can get to someone in their staff, they can push things along.
Mhm.
And I just say kind of the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and just keep after them if there's a particular thing. But I've noticed lately that you can't even find these people anymore. I mean, I we had a problem once. We was trying with a car company who shall remain unnamed, where there was some paperwork that was misfiled, and I had to change the license plate. When we went down to the state, and it showed that there was still a lien on the car from a loan, and it turned out no, the car had been paid for. And I called and called, and I couldn't get through, and I couldn't even find out the name of the CEO to send them my famous CEO email or letter or something like that. So, but I think just being kind of the sticky wicket, and just kind of keeping after people and being persistent. Despite all this, there are people with their heads on straight in some of these companies, and there are people that are sympathetic that will help you. I always say, I have friends in low places, so that also helps. Knowing your customer service people. So those are the things. Just
It
keep
is
after.
just getting very hard because a lot of these companies are buying up a lot of the smaller companies and knocking them out of business. But I do agree with what you're saying, Joel. So let's move into the last part of the conversation. We've talked a lot about what goes on in these dysfunctional companies. I do hope people again get the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Dysfunctional Companies. Joel has showed the book on the screen. I'm sure I'll do it again. Besides, besides the point, definitely go to Barnes and Nobles, your local bookstore. If you have to, go to Amazon. We always try to push the local yokel
Yeah.
bookstore in the Barnes and Nobles first before we go to Amazon, because everybody goes to Amazon for everything in the kitchen sink. I do want to end speaking about what the habits are of highly
Okay.
dysfunctional companies. I know we didn't really get into
I
that at
I
the
can go through them
beginning,
real quick. Yeah.
but go ahead.
So the first one, as I said, was if it makes sense, don't do it. So always skip the obvious, and that ranges at all levels from getting office supplies. It should be easier to actually go out on the street, go to down the street to a stationery store to get pencils than to actually use your own purchasing department. It should be impossible to be have any impact in the company. There should always be a lot of meetings. And then I go a lot. The second habit is about turf battles are part of our culture. This is where you have a lot of people in these companies. They're not really interested in the business. They're interested in their own egos and building their own little empires. So they've got to have they're building their little fiefdoms. And then the third thing I talk about is communication. So I say about excessive communication, and delivering the message poorly is the best way to do it. And that's a fairly long chapter. And I talk about emails and how people are inundated with garbage, and they're just listening to corporate nonsense. I talk a lot about what I call corporate speak, all this gobbledygook, how people talk, and when you start talking to people and they say, uh, things like, I'll pencil you in, I'll say, you need a vacation, I think, or realignment, take the car down the street, get a lube job, and there's your realignment, and then I talk a lot about acronyms, and I say that acronyms are very critical in making sure that people can't communicate with each other. In fact, one part of the company should have different acronyms than the other part of the company. And I actually have an acronym dictionary in the back, the main acronym though that underpins the whole book is the ADR, which is short for asshole density ratio, which is how many assholes there are per square foot in the company. And then of course the biggie is meetings. If you are not in a meeting, you will be assigned to one. And I talk about how there's police, I call them MPs, that means meeting police. They have armbands in the halls. If they see that you're walking in the hall, they'll throw you into a meeting. This is very important. If it can be done in an email, no, you got to have a meeting, right?
Yeah.
So right. So then, after that, I talk about customer service, and then I talk about treating, which we've talked about already, customer service, how you can't get a human being, human contact with the customers is prohibited. And then I talk about poor treatment of employees, and that's quite a long chapter. I talk about HR. I talk about how there's automated systems now. It's impossible to apply for a job. And because now you fill out an application online, you never know where it goes, you never hear anything, it's phantom thing, and then HR is kind of out of touch with reality. If they call you in for some complaint, they'll roll up a newspaper and they'll say no poo on the paper, not on your desk, cubicle warfare, all of that kind of stuff. I talk about training, and I talk about employee disorientation. That's about where employees get hired, and we've all been through this, where we go through maybe 1 or 2 days, if we're lucky, it's only 2 days of these orientation sessions where they strap headphones to you when you hear all this propaganda. And then the last thing is about the companies just not serving the common good. Companies talk about how great their employees are, how important they are, and then they let them go en masse, or they talk about they're green and we have a low carbon footprint, and then you look and they got polluting factories all over the place, and all of that, or they don't follow their political instincts. They may say one thing and then do another, so it's just kind of disjointed. So those were the kind of the 7 habits in a very quick, very quick nutshell, Rob.
Yeah, no, and it's great that you really wrote a book about this. People need to know about this stuff because they've dealt with this throughout their lives, whether it's working in the system or calling or walking into the system in general, as far as a business. So everybody's dealt with it, and you've kind of described it very much in depth. I want to go into this to close out. What do you hope people learned from our conversation today?
Okay. So I've been kind of like the cranky employee, ex-employee whining about this and that. I do have some positive things to say that, when I've been interviewed before. So I tell you, I say to people, do a good job at your work, but don't be loyal to the company. And I don't mean being disloyal. I mean, think beyond the company, think of your own career beyond the company, because the angel of death could strike at any moment. You could be out the door and you don't, your head is spinning and you don't know. You should always have a resume ready and updated regularly. Any training that's legitimate that the company will pay for and offer that will advance your skills, do it, take it. Constantly network. That's what I say. So if you're in an industry where there's an association for your profession, join it. Go to dinners, go to lunches, meet people, pass around business cards so people know who you are and that you're out there, right? Um, so, and then if you're like a student, or if you're in an alumni or former student alumni association, use those connections. So the way to get a job nowadays is like through your connections, like through
Right.
LinkedIn is, it is the way to do it. It's just not randomly sending resumes to these companies. Go, oh, that job looks like a great fit. Well, I tell people in the book, the only way that the scanners will see if will pick up your resume if you put the word asshole in the middle of the resume, and then, oh, we want that guy. So, so those are the tips. Yeah. Always think beyond the company, get yourself trained, always, keep training, keep learning, keep improving yourself, and then network, and network. So those are the key things that I say, to survive. A lot of people say, well, I should go into my own business. Well, yeah, if you can, but not, it's entrepreneurialism isn't for everybody. So, you have to make, that's a personal choice, and those are difficult roads to take. So those are my suggestions, Rob.
Well, you got to know how to tread the line for sure.
Yeah.
But anyways, Joel, I hope that you come back on again. It was really a pleasure. I know you have
Thank you.
another book out there, so we do hope to have you on to speak about that. We hope people listening to this conversation and the many others we'll do in the future. Again, this is Joel Dubin, is joeldubin.com, JOELDUBIN.com, and then dysfunctionalcompany.com is his other website. And then on Twitter, it's Dubin's Languages. It's DUBINSLANGUAGES on Twitter. And then the book, of course, is The 7 Habits of Highly Dysfunctional Companies. And we do hope you get that. We'll have Drew. We'll have Joel. I'm getting tongue tied because I'm running my mouth too much, Joel. But
Hey
we'll
man,
have
I've
you
been
on.
called worse. I've been called worse.
We'll have you on. Hey, as long as it's not a swear word.
Yeah.
We'll call you. We'll call you and have you on again for sure, Joel.
Okay,
Because
great,
again,
Rob.
we want to speak about that other book. So Joel Dubin, thanks so much.
Thank you, Rob.
Dysfunctionalcompany.com.
Appreciate it. It's great. It's a lot of fun.